everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of Preemie Chats today. We are celebrating World Breastfeeding Week, and that runs from August 1st until the 7th. So we have an amazing lineup of guests joining us today. We're going to go a little longer than usual, but it will be well worth it. This topic is so important to preemie parents and healthcare professionals. Preemie Chats is a program that is for healthcare professionals and parents to talk about what matters most to you, to explore new ideas, and to learn together. Today's program is sponsored by AstraZeneca and Medela in collaboration with FICARE, the Canadian Association of Neonatal Nurses, the European Foundation for the Care of Newborn Infants, and the Global Alliance for Newborn Care, or GLANCE. I'm Leah Whitehead. I'm a proud preemie mom and former journalist, and I'm happy to be your host today from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Preemie Chats was created and is put on by the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, which is also well known as CPBF. The foundation is a parent-led charitable organization that helps families in and after NICU through education, support, and advocacy. If you have a heart for preemies, whether you're a family or a healthcare professional, please check out the CPBF website. There it is on the screen, canadianpreemies.org. There you will find resources, the latest projects, and most importantly, a community of people who want to see our babies thrive. Today's session is live, so please bring your voice to the table. Leave comments and questions in the chat, and we'll try to address them during our program. It is through rich conversations like these that we're going to have today where we can advance, practice, and learn together. So please participate and let us know where you're watching from. As I already mentioned, today is a special day. We're talking about breastfeeding. We will discuss the importance of human milk to protect preterm babies' health in their first critical weeks of life. I'm going to kick off our time together by sharing this beautiful free infographic. There it is. You can download it again from the CPBF website, canadianpreemies.org. You can use it as a resource for either yourself or your unit and just take a look. It has beautiful graphics on it. It is packed with information about the benefits of breast milk for little ones. And it's currently available in English, but stay tuned for other versions. And like I said, it's free. So you can just go to the website and download that. Tons of information, and there are all kinds of resources like that on the CPBF website. We are starting off today. We've got lots of guests, and so just bear with us as we try to sort through any technical difficulties we may be having. But we're going to start off today with a very important voice. We're going to be talking to a preemie mom. And so we're going to start with Lisa Naylor. And it's important starting with talking with parents because I think by sharing our stories, we realize that as families, we're not alone and that there is strength and power in our journeys. So Lisa Naylor's from BC, and she is the mother of Everly, a 2-year-old who was born at 27 weeks. Everly needed donor milk for her first few days, but as you'll hear, once Lisa started producing milk, she didn't stop. She ended up donating over 100 liters. So mother and daughter spent 79 days in NICU, and Lisa believes human milk helped save her micro-preemie's life. We are so happy that she's joining us now. Welcome, Lisa.
Good morning, good afternoon.
On either sides of the country, right?
Yes, exact opposites.
I'm going to share your presentation and we'll just make sure everything's working for you.
Perfect. So I'm here today to talk about the liquid gold that our breasts produce, breast milk and the NICU, and how it is so important. So what are you sharing my slides or am I sharing?
Yes, they're up there.
Let me go through. So my personal story you touched on, I suffered PPROM at 25 weeks, delivered my baby via C-section after 2 weeks of bed rest and intermittent labor. The first 24 hours, my baby was on donor milk. It was something I never even heard of or had been part of, but I was like, absolutely, please give her what she needs until my body could start creating the supply. Shortly thereafter, I did notice, and the doctors and nurses did notice, that my supply quickly turned into an oversupply. Within that 79 days of being in the NICU, we were at Royal Columbian Hospital for the first 7 weeks while she was still on CPAP and needing that extra care. And then we moved to Abbotsford Regional Hospital. We worked on oral feeding during the NG tube, after the CPAP, and the OG feeding tube. I was so thankful to be working with lactation consultants. They are like such a godsend. Occupational therapists and nurses on latching, breastfeeding, and the pumping process, all new to me as a first-time mother. Their tips really, I feel, made my success, like my story, such a success. Many other healthcare professionals, approached me about donating. And as you said, yeah, I did end up donating over 101 liters to the NICU. The NICU's through the Milk Bank of British Columbia. I really wish I could have kept going, but time constraints and pumping, and that's very strenuous. Some tips and tricks that I did learn, that is a picture of my deep freeze that we did purchase strictly for milk. We actually call it the milk freezer now. Some things I did, even though it was during COVID and we had to wear masks and stuff, we couldn't eat during bedside, and I could just sip water under my mask on the occasion, but drink ample water throughout the day. Always have a water bottle handy wherever you are. Graze on healthier snacks and meals. Like I tried to have vegetables, like cut up vegetables and fruit, a nice healthy sandwich, just keeping up on eating to keep I feel like all of this helped with keeping my supply. I was actually taught by a lactation consultant to pump 8 times per day, 15-minute pumps, and cluster pumping in the morning, as well as including 1 pump between midnight and 4 a.m. So give yourself 2 4-hour breaks in the night, so you're at least able to sleep a little bit better. It's roughly around what you would be doing for a feeding schedule for a newborn baby as is. My example for my schedule was like 2 a.m., 6 a.m., 8 a.m., 10 a.m., 12 p.m., 3 p.m., 6 p.m., and then 10 p.m. So I did have breaks throughout the day, but I was pumping at the hospital and then pumping at home. And I ended up being told not to bring any more milk from home, because it was just the stuff that I was pumping at the hospital was suffice. And of course, as much skin to skin as you can get. Those cuddles are super important, not just for you and your baby and producing the milk, but also emotionally. I think it really helps with everything. And I know it's not easy to get skin to skin, especially if they're born, 22 weeks, 23 weeks, 25 weeks in there. They're in the incubators for longer periods of time because they're so fragile, but just try and get as much as you can when that's possible. Why should you donate? The babies are so fragile, as I said. Babies born before 30 weeks are the most susceptible to infections, no matter it's a matter of life and death for micro preemies because they should be digesting amniotic fluid for months still, let alone milk, and especially not formula. It's really rough on their digestive system. They can develop things such as NEC. It's a serious disease that affects the intestines of preemie infants and usually happens within the first couple weeks of life. And formula is proven to be a cause of it, reacting to the very premature babies. And you would be helping out moms that have had extremely early traumatic births that unfortunately cannot produce milk because of that, or very little. which they're the mothers that need it the most. And if you're an overproducer, your milk will go to the most needy babies and the tiniest little things that you've ever seen. So you'd be easing the mother's stress and literally saving babies' lives. How to donate. To me, it was real, like I got given pamphlets and talked to about it, but until my daughter was home from the NICU, I wasn't really I wasn't in the mindset, and you don't have to be. You can freeze your milk and think about it when they come home. That's what I did. I then started looking into it, going online and contacting people. It was a little frustrating at first, but the first step is either an in-person or by phone interview. And then you'll ask various questions where to see if you're suitable. And then they'll contact your doctor to get a blood screening and an agreement to donate. And then second step, they review and send your doctor a request for information and the blood work requisition you require. And then you get the blood tests are then ordered. So then you just have to go to the blood. I went to the hospital and booked an appointment, and they took it at my convenience. They just checked my blood. Third step, the results are sent to the physician. And then once they get the test back saying that you're good to donate, then you'll be contacted by the milk bank. And then the fourth step is really just bringing your milk into the local bank, or I brought it into the local public health unit. Date stamp your milk storage bags. And like I said, you can donate milk stored in your deep freezer months after pumping. You can donate up to 18 months postpartum milk. How can you help donations? I'm here because I want to raise awareness. There's no commercials for it. I was, as a first-time mother, I had never heard of it. All my friends had full-term babies, and I didn't know anyone who had gone through this themselves. So I actually didn't know anyone who had actually donated before or had the need for donations. So donating milk yourself. If you're hearing this or you see something and you think it's a possibility, just give it a shot. They don't need 100 liters. They can take a lot less. Sharing stories of donation is also a way of doing it, verbally or on social media. I've been sharing on my social media, and I've even one of my friends reached out and said, oh, my son is now 7 months old and I've got a little extra milk. I think I'm going to start trying. And they wouldn't have tried if they hadn't seen my post on my personal Facebook. So you may inspire someone to donate. And if that's one person, that's amazing, because we only had 333, I think they said, donors last year in BC. And that's less than 1% of births recorded in that year. It's a small amount. Advocating, donating to experienced moms. Maybe it's their third child and they didn't think about it before, but maybe they are good producers. New moms who wouldn't have heard of it before, or expecting moms. Saying it beforehand isn't a bad thing. What if I didn't have a preemie and I had a full-term baby and I'm an overproducer? I wouldn't have known to donate. Also delicately offer it to bereaved mothers. They might want to find an outlet of part of their grief. I call this my silver lining to the experience I had in the NICU, is being able to donate. It means so much to me, being side by side with mothers that couldn't produce, and that I know that I'm easing some of that pain. It's maybe something that could make that situation a little bit easier on them, even though you'd think it's unimaginable. I can't imagine. So if you're a healthcare professional, please verbalize it. Pre and postnatal patients, nurses in hospitals and immunization clinics. It's a huge source. Lactation consultants, doctors, occupational therapists. You're all people that approached me or that I interacted that could see that I was an overproducer. Papers on the wall in your offices or getting a brochure isn't enough. Like it's overwhelming becoming a first-time mother or in the NICU. It's just like verbalizing it is the best way to reach across to someone that could possibly donate. Just to finish up, donating is a process that can feel daunting, but is, like I have stressed, it's the most rewarding, knowing that you're saving baby's life. Please reach out to your local resources, contact a lactation consultant to help you optimize your pumping and or breastfeeding journey. They're absolutely an underutilized tool that I think is so important in our society. And also, they taught me about different latching. NICU nurses taught me about different latching. So I would have crazy letdown on my left breast. So on my right breast, I always practice with Everly. So I wasn't able to get really comfortable with my left breast. So even though I was pumping and stuff, like it really mattered to get comfortable with my left breast to have that breastfeeding after and to continue that journey. Because some people might give up if they are really frustrated that they can't do it, So making sure that you're teaching moms, because me being a new mother at the time, I was really comfortable with Everly across my chest and cradled in the cradle position, you could say, for my right breast, but my left breast, it just felt foreign. So someone taught me to do a football carry for her on the other side, and it was game changing. So keeping a mother in her breastfeeding journey always allows her to feed her baby. Not only, yes, that's very, very important, but it also gives the possibility of keeping her supply up for increased chance of donating. And then look up milk donation websites in your local area, because I know we're all over the country or world, and or talk to your healthcare professionals and help guide you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Lisa. I wonder, how were you first approached about this?
I would have to say it was probably my NICU nurses. They started telling me that, oh, hey, you have way too much in our freezer. You're like, each mom is given a certain amount in the freezer. We need you to start taking some home. So that's when they started saying, and then I would share pictures of the progress of how my deep freeze was getting filled at home. And they're like, oh my goodness, like you are an untapped source that we need. We desperately need your milk. And I was like, done. Like my daughter was being amply fed, and I was able to give her milk and her food up until she was over 1.
Wow. And so this whole journey for you of now advocating for people to donate, how do you think that's helped you process your own NICU journey?
I think it's not only like it's carried on, like it's in a good way. Like that experience, I feel it's making it positive, because as any mom has gone through it, it's not a fun experience. It's an emotional roller coaster. You're in your biggest lows and some great highs too when they're hitting their milestones and they're healthy. But it's really, it gives people postpartum. I definitely got some anxieties from it. Also having a micro preemie during a pandemic, like that was really challenging. So yeah, like it eases those things though. Like I feel like, it reaches out to other people, and I think other people can relate, or other people are inspired. And I hope some people are inspired to do it themselves.
And how are you advocating now? Do you have kind of a network of people who are promoting this, or is it just like a personal kind of thing you're doing? Or?
It's kind of been a bit of a waterfall. Like I was by the milk bank in BC. I was asked to share my story. And so I wrote out my story, and they shared it on their site. And then I guess CBC and then CTV and then Global, they all started getting inspired and like, hey, like this is actually really a great story, and maybe other people will donate. it'll increase awareness at least. And I was really thankful that other people were picking it up, because then the more people that are aware of it, the better. So it's just been kind of a waterfall. And then someone on the Facebook group, Fabiana, approached me and asked if I would do this talk. And I'm like, sure, anything that promotes it.
And just how can you even put into words what it meant for you for your daughter to get donor milk in those first few days?
Honestly, I didn't know anything about NEC. I didn't know anything about anything. I didn't know anything. It means the world to me, knowing that it would just bridge that gap, even if it was 24 hours, that like I was like, sorry, I get emotional, but like,
of course,
my daughter is so healthy. She never got an infection. Neither did I. Like her eyes are perfect. Her ears are perfect. Like her hearing, she's just so smart. Her brain bleeds went down, like everything. Like she didn't need any surgeries or anything like that. And just seeing how tiny she was, like her bicep used to be smaller than my thumb. Like that is, to me, looking at that, like realizing it now after the fact, it means the world to me that she was able to receive that. Mm-hmm. At the time, I was so overwhelmed with my C-section and just everything that happened in the 2 weeks previous to, I didn't realize how important it actually was that I was able to receive that, or like my daughter was able to receive that.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you had to do some juggling with your work, but we really appreciate you being here and sharing this, and also spreading the word about donation.
It's absolutely my pleasure. I'm glad I could make it happen.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for inviting me.
Anytime. We'd love to hear moms talking about their experience. And I think even being able to spread it more widely in terms of how other people can help, it's amazing. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for helping.
Our next guest is a neonatologist and director of breastfeeding medicine at Sick Kids and associate professor at University of Toronto. Dr. Rebecca Hoban is going to share with us how colostrum is the bridge between intrauterine and extrauterine life and the golden ticket in optimizing preemie health. Dr. Rebecca Hoban graduated from Indiana University School of Medicine and completed her pediatric residency at Cincinnati Children's, did her neonatology fellowship at Tufts and MPH at Harvard before joining Chicago's Rush Medical Center. Dr. Hoban transitioned to Sick Kids in Toronto in 2017, where her focus is human milk. Thank you for joining us today, Rebecca.
Thanks so much. All right, thanks for having me. Excited to chat with everyone. Let me share my screen. 1 second.
Technology's going to cooperate for us, I think. There we go. Good.
Perfect. It doesn't always happen. So perfect. All right. So again, thanks for having me. I'm just going to chat for a few minutes about colostrum, which is, I think, very exciting. My disclosures. So I'm going to talk about why colostrum is so amazing. So it's this really unique substance as we transition into mature milk. And I'm going to talk about not only why it's so cool, but why it's so important for preterm babies especially. So what is colostrum? So first of all, it's a species-specific, dyad-specific biologic fluid. So what does that mean? So it means it's made especially for each mother-baby combination. And I'll be using the word mother, but obviously that can refer to any lactating parent. So the really interesting thing about colostrum is that, as Leah had referred to, it's this continuum from the intrauterine life. So in utero, your baby is continuously bathed in swallowed amniotic fluid. It's how their gut and their lungs develop. And amniotic fluid is full of all kinds of really interesting things. All these bioactives that really assist in developing the baby's gut and intestines. It's full of growth factors that really differentiate and change the gut. It's also full of anti-inflammatory cytokines or immune modulators. And the same stuff is found in colostrum. So it really allows the baby to go from inside to outside with this really nice transition. And interestingly, it's similarly protective. So they've done studies in mice, for example, where instead of feeding colostrum, they fed amniotic fluid, and they found that both are very protective against necrotizing enterocolitis, or a really serious gut problem that we see in our preterm babies. And that mice fed amniotic fluid have reduced gut bacteria and inflammatory markers in a similar way that we see with babies fed colostrum. So again, this nice kind of continuum. So when exactly do you make colostrum? So interestingly, well before a baby's born, the breasts are already getting started. So some moms or parents can already make colostrum as early as 12 weeks of pregnancy, and most moms are making it by about 18 weeks or so, but you typically don't know that you're making it, although some moms might get a little bit of colostrum, for example, when they take a warm shower. Postpartum, you make it for only a couple of days. So it's this really time-limited, really special substance that lasts for about 3 to 5 days or so. And you can visually see in this picture how this really dark colostrum then goes to transitional milk and into mature milk. So what purpose does colostrum serve? So one of its obvious purposes is as a first food. So again, that transition into extrauterine life and needing to use the gut. But even though it's milk, it's a very different milk than mature milk, especially for preterm babies. So it's actually low in fat, low in energy, and low in lactose, unlike mature milk. It's actually a 50% difference in the fat content in preterm colostrum versus regular milk. And this really suggests that it's actually not so much a food as an immunologic product. So it's really something that the body makes to protect the baby rather than to just feed the baby. It's yellow because it's high in beta carotene, and it's really kind of a nice vitamin shot. It's full of vitamin A, copper, and zinc that helps baby's skin, eyes, brain, and immune system, and has magnesium for heart and bone health as well. So although it's low in fat, it's actually really high in protein. It's has about twice as much protein as mature milk, and even more in the preterm baby. You can see from this little graphic here that the preterm colostrum and milk, you can see how milk has this, again, really high protein content that's really important in our preterm babies who really quickly need to try to reestablish their metabolism and extrauterine life. And this is important because donor milk, which is typically milk from a mom who is term and has been lactating for quite a while, donor milk is actually very low in protein comparatively. And so when we give babies donor milk versus colostrum, they're a very different product. So it's really ideal to try to get mother's colostrum in those first couple of days. Finally, it's really salty. This is a good thing for us as neonatologists because preterm babies lose a lot of salt in their kidneys. So colostrum helps us that way. And actually, as sodium levels fall in milk, that's actually a physiologic signal that you're moving into transitional milk because of various changes in the cells in the breast. So once mom's milk comes in, sodium levels have really decreased. So we've talked about how it's much more than a food. So let's focus on the immunologic components of colostrum because that's what makes it really special. So we know that we talked about how amniotic fluid helps the baby's gut form. Amniotic fluid has epidermal growth factor, which is a substance that really helps both in intestinal development, but important for our preterm babies, helps in intestinal repair. This special factor is resistant to digestive enzymes, so it is able to survive through the gut. It's anti-inflammatory, and it increases the number of cells in the baby's gut. As well, it helps it function better. And importantly, EGF helps with gut repair after babies have necrotizing enterocolitis, so that serious gut problem, just general hypoxia or low oxygen levels, or any other kind of tissue damage. And colostrum is full of this stuff, about 2,000 times higher than in mature milk. And it's highest in preterm colostrum. So it's this really interesting situation in which the mom's body almost knows that she delivered a preterm baby and knows that it needs extra protection in those first couple of days. Colostrum also has other growth factors like TGF-beta and insulin-like growth factors that, again, assist in gut and tissue repair and can also help with some immunoglobulin production, which we'll briefly touch on in a moment. I won't go into details of this chart, but basically the one-liner is the black bars are colostrum and the gray and white bars are mature and transitional milk. And you can see how tall these black bars are for all of these growth factors compared to regular milk. So again, colostrum is this massive both immune boost, but also full of growth factors that are just waiting to help babies' intestines. Immunologically, those growth factors also help immune cell function. And probably most importantly, colostrum is chock full of IgA. So IgA is a special antibody that really kind of coats the gut. So it blocks bacteria from entering. And then if bacteria try to enter, it directly binds those microbiomes, those microbes to help prevent infection in babies. It also helps promote good bacteria, so it helps affect the baby's microbiome. And it's been reported that colostrum has much higher levels of both this IgA as well as cytokines compared to mature milk. So again, very protective. And finally, fresh colostrum, just like mature milk, has live stem cells. So these are stem cells from the maternal breast. We don't really know why they're in there, but we do know that in other studies, stem cells definitely seem to have the potential to repair injury. Whether it's gut injury or brain injury, for example. And importantly, frozen milk doesn't have stem cells because they only survive a few hours. So it's really only in fresh milk, fresh colostrum, that we have stem cells. So I've talked about what's in it. But what does that actually mean? Like, why is this so important? So to summarize it, colostrum is an immunological and growth factor booster with over 90 bioactives. It's this amazing kind of medical product that Mother Nature has put together that's protection for all babies before they can actually get their first immunizations. It's this continuation of the protective factors that go through the placenta. And this is important, especially for our preterm babies that missed some of those weeks or months of placental growth. And it's also really important in places like NICUs, where we know babies are exposed to very kind of abnormal bacteria or unusual bacteria compared to what they would be if they were term babies in the community. It establishes a healthy gut microbiome, which we know is important both in the newborn period and throughout life for health. And it's really cool in that it actually differs with every single mother-baby pair. So this is the ultimate personalized medicine that is not only different for each pair, but also then changes over time and over that continuum. We know that preterm colostrum is even higher than term colostrum in most protective factors. And again, really important since our babies missed some of those factors through the placenta. So this is really liquid gold for these most vulnerable babies, for all babies, but especially for preterms. And so what is the evidence that, even though this sounds really great, what is the evidence that colostrum actually is helpful? So there's actually been a lot of studies with oral immune therapy, or OIT. Hospitals have different names for it as well. But that's basically when you're painting small amounts of colostrum into the mouth with an oral syringe or a swab or a sponge, just to give tiny little amounts, not of food, but of, again, this kind of medicine that mother's milk and colostrum is. And large meta-analyses, so studies that pool a lot of other studies together, they really show us that colostrum OIT is associated with a shorter time to full feeds. So babies get to full feeds faster and it helps their feeding tolerance. They're in the NICU for a shorter amount of time, which is, I think, every NICU parent's goal. And then there's likely reduced incidence of necrotis and enterocolitis, as well as sepsis, infection, and even mortality in the NICU. And as our recent review recommended, then really this OIT is recommended as routine care for preterm infants in the NICU. It's something that's almost free, is easy to do, and is well tolerated for really any baby in the NICU, regardless of how ill they are. So it's a great way to really share all of those factors with the baby. So to wrap up, so quick talk. So colostrum is a nutritional superfood that's full of protein and vitamins, unique for every baby. But likely its most important role is that first vaccine, that anti-infective or immunological role, which is especially valuable in our preterm babies who lacked often that third trimester transplacental protection. And finally, OIT really seems to reduce the time to full feeds and NICU length of stay, with potential protection against serious morbidities in the NICU like NEC. So thanks for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions about colostrum or milk or anything else. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much for sharing that presentation with us. So interesting, all of that, the whole comparison with amniotic fluid. I hadn't even heard that before, so it's very cool. We do have some questions here. We received one question via email, so I'm just going to pop that up here. And it says, is exclusive breastfeeding possible amongst higher order moms of multiple births, quadruplets, quintuplets, sextuplets, etc., especially vulnerable ones?
Well, I think it's a great question. Definitely have seen exclusive breastfeeding in moms of multiples. That being said, kind of grand multiples, so your kind of higher order multiples, quads, etc. It's physiologically really tough to be able to actually make enough milk. The body definitely makes more milk with higher order multiples, and some of that is with tandem pumping, etc. I've sometimes seen it with triplets, but higher order multiples, I think it would be very challenging to just have enough of a supply, even with the best of lactation support. You also need to take in so much nutrition and so much liquid as well to pump out. Like, you basically need to make multiple liters a day. So at some point, the breast kind of reaches its physiologic capacity. So typically with quads or higher, although we can establish a great supply, typically those babies will need some supplementation. That being said, any amount of mother's milk is really valuable. And so even if it's spread among the babies, that's still an incredible thing to be able to do.
Mm-hmm. We have another question here. Whoops, that's me with the buttons trying to get back to her. There, here we go. Okay, Fabiana wants to know, is oral immune therapy already standard of care in Canada? And also, is it practiced in level 2 NICUs?
I would say yes and yes. I think the majority of our level 2 community NICUs also do it, and in all of the tertiary centers, I believe it is and should be standard of care. It's something that even for instance, like our surgical babies that are NPO, so nothing by mouth, babies that are critically ill, and even though they can't use their gut for reasons at the moment, so they can't actually feed, there's really no contraindications to oral immune therapy because it's such a small volume, and again, it's full of all of these protective factors. So it is typically done in NICUs worldwide, and I think these studies are now, about at least, a lot of them are at least 5 years old, but there's still new studies coming out showing the benefits. So I think more and more people are jumping on board because it's a really easy thing to do and really with no downsides.
I was interested when you were talking about how colostrum can be made by our bodies prenatally. Is there any merit to even expressing colostrum prenatally?
So that's a really common question we get. With a couple different answers, I think, depending on who's asking, to be frank. So it is definitely possible to express colostrum prenatally. And there are segments of the population for which some people will recommend that, particularly like moms with diabetes, for example, where their babies are likely to quickly need milk basically in the first few hours because of risk of low blood sugar. That being said, for the preterm population, it is not at all recommended to try to express prenatally, and that's because breast stimulation actually can promote uterine contractions. So that's a great thing postnatally about pumping or putting baby to breast, is that it actually reduces bleeding after delivery because it's causing uterine contractions. But prenatally, those contractions can cause preterm labor. And so it's, if moms are going to do it, which, you know, the evidence is a bit iffy, but if moms are going to do it, they really shouldn't consider it until after 37 weeks, when that risk of preterm delivery is basically not a concern anymore.
And so is it helpful for babies to have it longer than they do? Or like you were saying, how it really only lasts for the first 3 to 5 days and then your milk comes in, as we say, but would it be more beneficial for preterm babies to get that longer, or should they follow that kind of natural milk process?
It would be nice for them to get it longer, but nature has its own ideas about how long you can make colostrum for. So there's not a way to kind of like, you know, change your milk to let you make colostrum for longer. That'd be super cool if we could. There's also been studies, for instance, with bovine colostrum. So can we use cow colostrum to kind of be a substitute for that? You know, those studies are a bit mixed because then you're also exposing babies to early cow's milk protein. But really, you know, we'll take whatever colostrum we can get. Even the tiniest little drops are important. And so typically moms will, try to collect that in a very small container so we can use every single drop.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question, because I know people get frustrated when they're pumping and they literally are getting drops. And sometimes it's that expression and you get like 3 drops.
Yeah.
How should parents feel about that? Because it can be frustrating when
Yeah.
I think we have a mindset that you're going to produce milk and that's providing for your baby, and then you work so hard and you get 3 drops.
Yeah, so you should be really proud of those 3 drops. So even in the term population, so we know moms that deliver preterm take typically longer for their milk supply to come in, and even can take a bit longer for kind of to be able to express even drops of colostrum. But even in the term population, you make a few milliliters of milk in the first day. And so if a term baby is going to breast, parents don't see how little milk they're actually getting, but they're getting almost nothing. What they're getting is really concentrated and really important, but they're getting very, very little. But when you're pumping, you see how little you're making, and it looks like there's nothing there. Like, what's wrong with me? Why aren't my breasts doing what they're supposed to do? They're 100% doing what they're supposed to do. That's concentrated, good stuff. And every time you pump, you're stimulating this hormonal loop to tell your breast to make more milk. And so even if you're just getting a drop or two, that's still a really critical step. So to not be frustrated, collect every little drop. I always recommend double pumping because that really helps you make levels of prolactin, which helps make more milk. But sometimes pumping those first couple hours, you can't get out that thick colostrum well. So you can use hand expression as well to get out those drops, but to still make sure you're pumping to make sure you get that hormonal feedback loop to make more milk.
You also talked about how it gets you home faster with the oral immune therapy. Do you think it's because, or has there been research to show that it's because baby enjoys feeding more, and is like, why is that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think we don't know. I think some of it potentially is some of the growth factors. Like, we think it really helps mature the gut a bit and helps baby's feeding tolerance be better. there have been studies where they've, for example, even just been able to capture like the scent or the smell of mom's milk helps the baby's gut move better. And so when you're putting that in the mouth, it's a whole sensory experience as well. You're having them start to, if you put the oral syringe in, that they might start to suck, so you're stimulating the actual feeding reflexes as well. It also, if you're giving fresh colostrum, by definition, you're at the bedside. And we know that the more parents are there and the more skin to skin they do and the more interaction they have, the faster babies go home as well. So it's really part of this whole probably multifactorial cocktail that helps babies get home faster.
We have a question online from Josephine. Looks like there's 2 comments here. Watching from Qatar. And they advocate for prenatal expression. And then the question is, any advice on cultural and donor milk?
So are you referring, if you're coming from Qatar, are you referring to milk kinship in Islam? Maybe. If that's I'm not sure if that's what she's potentially referring to. So milk kinship is a belief that if you are breastfed by a woman, you can't, basically if you're breastfed by multiple women, those children can't then marry. Basically, I think I didn't speak to that very well, but it becomes a relationship that you are then you become kin with whoever has breastfed you, and so there have been concerns previously that then donor milk might not be acceptable, specifically to Muslim populations, because of this concern for milk kinship, because you aren't able to link. You don't know whose milk it was, basically, and so then you're not able to link it back to a certain mom and know who you share milk kinship with. Throughout the world, this has been, again, I'm hoping this is what she's asking about. Throughout the world, this has been discussed by multiple groups, and there are specific fatwas about it, that it basically is allowed, and is because it's beneficial to the baby. You can kind of circumvent that milk kinship question. So donor milk basically should be acceptable through the really for any religious group. And when there have been questions here in Toronto, where we have a large Muslim population, we've been able to get our local imams and groups to talk to parents to kind of show these fatwas, and so it hasn't been an issue.
Do you have any more advice you want to share as we wrap up for those parents who are trying to get colostrum or breastfeed their little ones while they're in NICU?
I think just to keep going, and that every drop counts. I think a lot of people think that because breastfeeding is natural, it is super easy, and as soon as you deliver, like your breasts just start like shooting out milk. That is not at all true. And as someone who pumped for 2 years, like, it is hard. It is really hard work. That being said, it is so worth it. And no matter how much milk you get, you are doing the best thing you can for your baby. So whether that's an exclusive supply or whether you're able to give colostrum for a couple of days, it's an incredible gift that we know literally has lifelong benefits. So I think just to keep it up, and we'll take every drop that you can give us as neonatologists.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I know that you're working in NICU today, so you're.
I am. It's been a busy day. Typical before a holiday. So.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time and for sharing your knowledge with us. It was awesome to hear.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation. Happy Breastfeeding Week, everyone.
Necrotizing enterocolitis is one of the most severe and often deadly intestinal disorders in preterm infants. There are currently no ways to predict which baby will develop NEC, and treatment options are extremely limited. What is known, however, is that babies who receive human milk are less likely to develop NEC. Over the last years, Dr. Lars Bode's team has been able to decipher why human milk is so powerful in preventing NEC and is now leveraging this newly gained knowledge in developing technologies to better predict infants at risk, as well as new therapeutics in our fight against this devastating disorder. Dr. Lars Bode is a professor of pediatrics in the Division of Neonatology and the Division of Gastroenterology, Hepatology, and Nutrition, the Larson Rosenquist Chair of Collaborative Human Milk Research, and the founding director of the Mother Milk Infant Center of Research Excellence, or MommyCore, and the New Human Milk Institute, HMI, at the University of California in San Diego. Dr. Bode has published over 150 peer-reviewed articles on human milk, and in 2022, he ranked in the top 0.1% of most highly cited scientists in the world. Currently, Dr. Bode is leading a research program dedicated to research on breastfeeding and human milk in general, and human milk oligosaccharides. Did I say that right? In particular, I said I had to learn a new word to welcome Lars onto the program today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Perfect. It's oligosaccharides. You said that perfectly right. Thank you so much for having me. Much appreciated. Down here from Southern California all the way up to Canada. I'm going to talk about human milk oligosaccharides and the prevention of necrotizing enterocolitis. And you introduced that already, a devastating disease that we find in preterm infants. We've been working on this actually for 2 decades. It took us quite a while to find out how specific oligosaccharides can protect from this devastating disease, and are now trying to leverage that knowledge to build new therapeutics, but also to use that as a diagnostic to see which human milk is potentially most useful, especially when it comes to donor milk, to be fed to the preterm infant to have that full benefit. Okay, let me share my slides here real quick. Okay, and then I think I need to go on. Oh, there you are. You did it already for me. Perfect. All right, so let's get started. What are we going to talk about? We're talking about this. We're talking about necrotizing enterocolitis. And just to give you a few facts here, it's still one of the most common and devastating intestinal disorders that we find in preterm infants, an extremely high mortality rate. And the survivors are often faced with long-term nutritional and neurological complications. Etiology and pathogenesis of NEC is multifactorial and still poorly understood. But what we know is there's rapid onset, so we don't really have a chance to see this disease, this disorder to come on. It happens literally overnight, fulminant progression, and we have limited treatment options. So with all that, it's really most desirable to prevent necrotizing enterocolitis altogether before it strikes, because once we have necrotizing enterocolitis in a preterm baby, it's very difficult to manage them. What you see here on the left side is what gives us hope, and that is the observation that yes, 5 to 10% of preterm babies do develop necrotizing enterocolitis, but at the same time, we know that preterm infants who receive human milk are at a 6 to 10-fold lower risk to develop necrotizing enterocolitis. So what is in human milk that makes it so powerful to reduce the risk for this devastating disease dramatically? And if we could find out what that is, could we use that to develop new therapeutics to ideally prevent this disease from happening altogether? So if we look at we call this the power of human milk. What is in human milk that makes it so powerful? Now we can start on the left. Of course, there's water in human milk. There are carbohydrates, mainly lactose as the milk sugar, but also highlighted here oligosaccharides. And we'll talk about that for the really remainder of this presentation. Then we have lipids that are packaged in this very fascinating milk fat globule, very sophisticated proteins on multiple different levels, peptides, all other things. And then that's just the macronutrients. In addition to that, we have maternal cells, we have bacteria, we have viruses, we have vitamins, we have minerals, we have hormones, all the different goodies that we have human milk really loaded with. And we really set out to look at the macronutrients here first. And if you do that, you look at your protein, fat, the milk sugar lactose, but then we also notice there's oligosaccharides at an extremely high concentration, 5 to 15 grams per liter, which often exceeds the amount of total protein in human milk. So oligosaccharides are the third most abundant components of human milk after lactose and lipids. And if you compare that to bovine milk, there is hardly any of these oligosaccharides in bovine milk. Very strong difference between humans and really all other mammals. And since bovine milk is the basis for infant formula, most infant formula at least, we have hardly of these oligosaccharides in infant formula. And we see that as a stark difference. So oligosaccharides loaded in human milk, but not present in infant formula. And since we see this observation that that infants that receive human milk are at a much lower risk to develop NEC, we set out to test the hypothesis that it's potentially oligosaccharides that contribute to this power of human milk in protecting against NEC. So that's our hypothesis, is it the human milk oligosaccharides or HMOs that participate? And just a brief, very short introduction to human milk oligosaccharides without going into each individual structure here. Oligosaccharides are complex sugars. They're made of 5 building blocks that you see here on the left side, glucose, galactose, N-acetylglucosamine, fucose, and sialic acid. They all have these different shapes and colors to it, so we can easily identify them. And then depending on how you put them together, you get very different sets of structures, either longly elongated structures or more complex charged structures. Bottom line here really is that we have about 150 to 200 different human milk oligosaccharides identified in human milk, but not every mom, not every person makes the same set of oligosaccharides in the same concentration. So there's high inter-individual variation. And if we test the hypothesis that oligosaccharides are potentially responsible for protecting against NEC, not every child is protected when you receive human milk. So it could be that the variation of human milk oligosaccharide composition contributes to that. And depending on what oligosaccharides you make, you're more or less protected against this devastating disease. So this is a fairly packed slide that I usually try to animate and go bit by bit, but just to throw it all out there, this is literally almost 2 decades worth of work and how we identified one specific human milk oligosaccharides that we think is involved in protecting the preterm infant from NEC. So I'll guide you through this, start with the top row, then go to the bottom row, and then bring it together in the center there and move forward, or show you how we move forward towards the right side. So how we started this is that human milk oligosaccharides do not grow on trees, so they're really only in human milk, and there's no set of oligosaccharides available that we could test immediately in the preterm infant to see whether they protect from NEC or not. So we started in an animal model first and isolated human milk oligosaccharides from pooled donor milk, and we used pooled milk to make sure that we capture the entire garden variety of oligosaccharides that are known to be in human milk, so all 150 to 200 different structures. Tested that in an animal model and found that there is a very significant impact on reducing NEC-like symptoms, but also improving survival of the animals when they're exposed to NEC-inducing agents. Then we wanted to know, well, these are 150, 200 different oligosaccharides. Is it one specific structure or is it multiple different ones? Do they all do the same job? Like, how does this look like? So we fractionated the oligosaccharides in multiple different steps and eventually identified that we indeed have one oligosaccharide called DSLNT that you see there in the center of the slide, which stands for disiallyl lacto-N tetraose. That oligosaccharide in the animal model was the most beneficial in reducing NEC-like symptoms and improving survival. Now that's great, but we're still working in an animal model, and we often got the criticism that people said like, well, yeah, animals, but how does this translate to the human preterm infant? So again, oligosaccharides not available, DSLNT certainly not available at that time to do an intervention study in humans. So we used an intermediate step and designed a cohort where we recruited moms and their very low birth weight infants prospectively, and then sampled milk about every second day, and that's the milk that went into those preterm infants on the day that we collected and analyzed the sample. Then we did analyze those milk samples for human milk oligosaccharide composition, and then looked at which infant developed necrotizing enterocolitis and which one did not, and drew associations between the composition of oligosaccharides and who is at highest risk to develop NEC. And we found, to our great surprise, in 3 different independent cohorts, that the oligosaccharide DSLNT that we shown before to be protective in the animal model was also in higher concentrations in the milk that went into infants that did not develop NEC. Or in other words, if baby develops NEC, then it is very likely that it received human milk that had low levels of this protective oligosaccharide. So that was very confirming for us that the data from human cohort studies matched from what we've seen in the animal before. So it's not just pure associations. There is really feeding studies in animals behind that corroborate potential causalities. Okay, so that's great. We got a few steps further. We showed that human milk oligosaccharides do contribute to this link between necrotizing enterocolitis and human milk being protective, and not just human milk oligosaccharides in general, but this one specific oligosaccharide called DSLNT. And that now opens the opportunity to develop new therapeutics, for example, by making this oligosaccharide synthetically. So there is currently ways to make oligosaccharides synthetically, either by chemical synthesis, by chemoenzymatic synthesis, or more sophisticated and more robust in bioengineered microbes. So you have microbes that you feed with simple sugars, and they start spitting out more complex oligosaccharides like this DSLNT. Now, DSLNT is not an easy oligosaccharide to synthesize, and it turns out if we wanted to do this and feed DSLNT at sufficient concentrations to prevent NEC, it would currently cost us about $900,000 per baby if we feed this for the first 4 weeks of life to prevent NEC. And that is unfeasible at this point, an extremely high cost. At the same time, we're working with several different partners to bring down these costs by employing new technology to make these oligosaccharides available. So I would predict that in the next few years, we see this number drop significantly and get into the feasibility range. However, there is another opportunity, and I think that is even more promising, and that is even more powerful because it really leverages the human milk itself, either donor milk or mom's own milk. And that is the opportunity to develop what we call a diagnostic. So in other words, we've seen that there is a certain threshold concentration of DSLNT that we need to have in human milk in order to prevent NEC. Now, what we did is we screened about 200 different active milk donors here in the US and found that 23% of them have DSLNT concentrations under or below the NEC preventing threshold. So if we could identify which milk donors have low levels of this DSLNT and then pool milk in the milk bank together to reach above that threshold and then feed that milk with sufficient amount of DSLNT to the preterm infant, I think that would really get us to the point where we don't need to supplement with DSLNT, where we don't need the synthetic compound, but where we can be very smart about targeted pooling of human milk and identifying those batches of donor milk that are more suitable for the preterm infant at risk of NEC. So the idea here would be to have some screening tool where we can deploy to the NICU, but also to donor milk banks to measure DSLNT concentrations at point of care. However, currently, if we did that, there is no real technology to do that. We would have to send milk samples to a lab, and there's not that many labs in the world that can do that. It usually takes about 2 weeks to get a result. And that, of course, is way too late. By that time, your preterm baby potentially is dead already. So that's not an option. So we need new technology to screen at point of care. And that's where we teamed up with one of our colleagues here in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, Dr. Drew Hall, who is doing that. He's developing point of care technologies to measure certain molecules in biological matrices like human milk and do that within 20 minutes. And so we teamed up with him and asked him, can you build us a device that can measure either an oligosaccharide or specifically DSLNT at point of care? And here's a first paper that we published last year, where we were able to use a very small handheld device that's literally smaller than your cell phone, where you drop in a little bit of milk, and then within 20 minutes, it's Bluetooth enabled, sends you the data to your cell phone or whatever device you're using to tell you, in this case, for the oligosaccharide 2FL, what the concentration is in human milk. So we're taking this a step forward now and making this also for DSLNT, which is the oligosaccharide that we think is linked to protecting from NEC. And we have some first results in the pilot device that can measure that fairly robustly. So the idea is to really deploy that to the NICU and to donor milk banks fairly soon. So two different opportunities to really leverage the power of human milk in the fight against necrotizing enterocolitis. One, by developing new therapeutics based on the template human milk. The things that we have in human milk, can we make them synthetically available and use that as new therapeutics? And then even more powerful, I think, to develop new diagnostics and pool human milk in a certain way and add maybe pooled donor milk to the feeding regime in the NICU with donor milk that is beyond and above that threshold to prevent necrotizing enterocolitis when we look at the specific oligosaccharide. So I leave you with that. Call it the harnessing the power of human milk to improve and save preterm infant lives, but really this can be extended to many other diseases that we see where human milk is potentially powerful in preventing diseases and saving lives. So I leave it with that and happy to take questions.
Thank you for your presentation. I not only learned how to pronounce the word, but now know a bit more about it as well. My first question is about, you said how we all have different levels of DSLNT. I'm wondering if it's been looked at or if there's even a way to know whether that's genetic or dietary, and are there things that parents can do to help develop that prenatally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly the big question that we're looking at right now as well. I don't have any definite answer for it yet. Certainly, oligosaccharide synthesis is highly genetically driven, but there is a few things that we know that nutrition plays a certain role. Even physical activity, we have a couple of papers out showing that physical activity changes milk oligosaccharide composition, which I find quite interesting. And there's a few other things, seasonality, location where you live on the planet, and a few other health conditions as well, gestational diabetes and things. For DSLNT specifically, we haven't really been able to map it down to like one factor. If you eat this, your DSLNT concentrations are going to be skyrocketing. We don't have that magic bullet. We do know that women that are a little bit older tend to make less of this DSLNT. We don't know why that is. So it's kind of a little bit of a double hit there. Not only are you at higher risk for preterm delivery, but also now you have that less of that protective component in human milk. But other than that, we know throughout the course of lactation that DSLNT drops a little bit. So it's higher in colostrum, and Rebecca was talking about that, how there's colostrum loaded with bioactive molecules, and the same is true for oligosaccharides. Same actually for prenatal colostrum. We've shown this just recently that even at 16, 17 weeks gestation, it's loaded with oligosaccharides. We were absolutely surprised to see the very high concentrations of oligosaccharides in that very early prenatal colostrum. So to answer your question, we don't know exactly what drives DSLNT other than it's genetic and maybe age-related, but we're certainly very interested in finding out more about that.
And a clarifying question, when you're talking about leveraging milk, is it looking at only donor milk, adding that to donor milk, or are you also looking to determine the level of DSLNT in mom's milk and also adding donor milk to that, or is it strictly for donor milk?
I would say both. So ideally, I would deploy a device like this to both the NICU to measure these concentrations in mom's own milk, but more powerful, of course, to do this in donor milk banks where you can screen individual donors and then you pool donor milk together anyway. So instead of pooling donor milk from, let's say, 3 or 8 donors that all have low levels of DSLNT, if you know what the concentration is, take a few donors that have higher levels to even that out and then bring it above that threshold, so that you can almost put a label on your donor milk batch afterwards saying, this is high in DSLNT, and then use that specifically to the infants that are at high risk to develop NEC. So that's I think is the first application. But also in the NICU itself, if you could tell a mom, continue making your milk, and we'll add some donor milk to it because we know there's maybe not enough DSLNT. We have to be very mindful not to to create any problems there, to say, hey, your milk is not sufficient. That certainly is not the message that we want to bring across. But if there is any guidance to say that, please continue to provide human milk, it's the best thing you can do. But because of this, let's add some donor milk to it. Or, if we had DSLNT available, let's add that to your own milk to make it even more powerful. I think that would be great.
Are you finding there's any changes in the levels based on whether it's frozen or fresh milk, or that has no impact?
Yeah, the beauty of oligosaccharides is that they're extremely resilient to all kinds of treatments. So repeated freeze-thaw cycles do not do anything to oligosaccharides. They do a lot to other milk components. Even pasteurization in the milk bank, oligosaccharides couldn't care less, really. While you lose a lot of other bioactive components in human milk, oligosaccharides are still there, and they still do what they need to do.
I'm just going to put up Fabiana's comment here. Fascinating work. I echo that. And just thinking about the future, my brain, I think, is just going a million miles a minute of what can be done in the future. And so if you're dreaming big, what is your kind of end goal here that you're hoping is accomplished through this research?
Yeah, well, I am a dreamer, but I also want to be realistic here and set realistic expectations. NEC, again, is a multifactorial disease, a disorder. And if we can reduce the number of infants that develop NEC and suffer and potentially die from it, if we reduce the number by identifying a better way to feed human milk, we know human milk is extremely powerful, and that clearly lowers the numbers of infants that have NEC. But it's not an all or nothing. It doesn't mean that if you receive human milk, you're protected, no questions asked. If we can reduce that or improve that even further by better pooling techniques, by point of care measurement, that would already be amazing. So just reducing the numbers of infants that suffer from this disease would be fantastic. But being a dreamer, I see this being applicable to many, many other things. So, currently not every donor milk bank really screens even for macronutrients. So that's your proteins, fat, your calorie content. I would love to see that more often. I would love to see more donor milk banks to actually treat this, with even more sophistication, in the sense that not all milk is the same. We know that. And if we could screen this before, and if we could build a product afterwards that is even more powerful especially for the preterm infant, that would be a dream for me, to bring more sophistication to the milk banks. There's a lot of passion in this space, and I would love to leverage that and bring this really to the baby. But again, outside of the preterm infant space, there is so many applications as well. Even to adults, we have some applications, especially for oligosaccharides, where potentially these oligosaccharides could protect us from heart disease, from cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, from arthritis. We have new work that shows that certain oligosaccharides might actually work in multiple sclerosis. So the more and more we learn about human milk, the more useful that is for all kinds of applications. That doesn't mean that we feed human milk now to the elderly, but if we identify how the mechanisms work and we can make those oligosaccharides or other milk components synthetically available, and these could be new drugs for really everyone, I think the power of human milk goes way beyond the preterm infant and way beyond the infant or children. There's so much for us to learn, and it's amazing how little we actually know about it.
Fabiana's comment sounds like exactly what you were talking about. She said, it almost sounds like we will have matching programs of donor milk, like what we have with blood types.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that analogy. Some of the blood types, the Secreter and Lewis blood types, are actually represented in human milk. We don't know whether we have to have a match there or not. It's certainly not, if you get the wrong blood type today in your blood transfusion, that's going to have very bad consequences for you. You're probably going to die from it. For milk, that's fortunately not the case. Right now, we don't see that a baby gets donor milk and there's some, life-threatening consequences. So fortunately, it's not as wild as it is for blood types in the blood donation world. But again, there's so much more that we can optimize, and that's really what my hopes are in that space.
Josephine, who had mentioned that donor breast milk is currently not acceptable, she said, any chance making it into medicine to benefit those who can't for cultural reasons?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, we're working on making, in this case, DSLNT available at much lower cost than the $900,000 that I showed you. So we did some calculations for grant applications and those things that we could bring the cost down to less than $1 if we did it right.
Wow.
And then we're talking about a completely different game. And then having a little sachet or a pill or something, or not a pill, but a sachet that we could actually sprinkle into mom's own milk to raise the levels of this oligosaccharide, or provided through other routes. That certainly is the goal of that. We're not quite there yet from a price point. But that's the goal. Ideally, we want to have this molecule as a therapeutic available, and then really work in concert with donor milk being high in this oligosaccharide, adding something to it, and we don't see that there's any downside of going a little bit beyond that threshold. It is in human milk. It is at very high concentrations in some human milk without showing any negative side effects. So that certainly is the goal.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing about this. Fabienne also made the comment, keep dreaming, which I love that because I think, like we said in the intro, NEC is devastating, and it is a big fear of families who are in NICU. And so this kind of research is so important and also very interesting when you look at what can be done and what the future could look like for our NICU babies. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Well, we've been talking about it all day, but having a baby in NICU is tough, and let alone trying to breastfeed one there. And so it's not often that NICU is an environment that's conducive to successfully breastfeeding a preterm infant. But that's why it's so important to have extra supports in place. So the Lactation Support Team at CHEO, Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario in Ottawa, started in June 2020 as part of a pilot project to have one of these lactation support teams. And it was run by the CHEO Foundation to better support lactating families. Now, as of October 31st, 2022, it's a permanent program within CHEO, and it's been striving to keep up with the growing demand of human milk feeding families, especially those in NICU. We're going to be joined here by Jennifer Dion and Alana Lakoff, who are both RNs and part of the CHEO Lactation Support Team. And they'll be sharing how the program supports families in NICU with early discussions regarding feeding goals and initiation of milk stimulation, along with oral immune therapy and colostrum collection, all of which we've been talking about today. Between them, Jennifer and Alana have more than 25 years experience, and their passion for lactation and families will show through today as they share with us the successes of their lactation program. Welcome, Alana and Jennifer.
Hi, thank you for having us. Okay, I'm just going to share the screen. And hopefully it will work.
Yes, technology has been cooperating so far today, so let's hope it keeps going.
Oh, it's asking me to unlock a whole bunch of things here. So, Leah, if you want to pull ours up, that
Absolutely
might work. Okay, it's a little glitchy, but that's okay. Yeah, you might just need to scroll through for us if that's okay as well. So just on to the next slide would be wonderful. So that's Leah gave us a really lovely introduction. Thank you for that. We are the Lactation Support Team at the Children's Hospital. So we are known as CHEO now, and we cover most of Eastern Ontario, Western Quebec, and the Nunavut program is also a major part of our patient population. So our NICU is a level 3B. So we have the highest level of care for those of the earliest gestation to term, as well as We support them through their breathing support and specialty surgeries, from medical to surgical to genetics and so forth. I think that's about it there. So Leah, next slide, please. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alana. I'm a casual NICU nurse and also part of the lactation team as well. Thanks for having us and the opportunity to be here. I just want to do a shout out for the Canadian Premature Baby Foundation on human milk. For whether you're a healthcare provider or family, there's amazing resources on your website. So thank you for creating all of that. And as you guys know, and what the whole point of today's topic is to highlight the importance of human milk. This is an unequaled and universally recognized as an optimal feeding choice for most infants. Human milk is medicine in the NICU, so it's essential to nutrition and growth. Inclusive language acknowledgement is a vital piece of our role as lactation consultants, and we use terminology that the families that we're working with identify when they provide consent to collaborate on their feeding goals for their baby or babies. Human milk can be fed in varying routes, and NICU parents truly are experts in the progression of feeds and multiple methods that we see in the NICU. I just want to highlight and say thank you also to Dr. Hoban today. She was a supporter of this program starting up in 2020, and a lot of her research helped provide evidence for us needing lactation consultants at CHEO, especially in the NICU. As part of her research, which we have our references at the end of our slides, highlights that NICU parents are considered at high risk for lactation challenges. A proactive approach to lactation care within the NICU has been associated with an increased percentage of infants receiving human milk. And part of this is through our role as a lactation consultant. Next slide, please. So having a lactation team at CHEO has been decades in the making, and we are so grateful for everyone's collaboration for the program to be officially launched and thriving. NICU nurses at CHEO have witnessed parents' lived experiences of what it means to be pumping often for an extended period for a critically ill infant. It was mainly due to parent voices that the lactation team finally came to fruition, and the lactation team originated in our NICU at CHEO. And this was to support the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario, we call it RNAO, one of their human milk best practice guideline, as part of CHEO becoming a best practice spotlight organization. And this was initiated in a pilot project that started with 3 NICU nurses who were also already internationally board certified lactation consultants, abbreviation IBCLC. And that consisted of Susan Lapine, Catherine Charbonneau, and me. And our NICU manager, Shirley Roddick, and our educator, Cynthia Jolly, were key supporters in navigating this first year of this new nursing role. The team has grown to include Emma Buste and Jennifer Dion, who are our current leads right now for the team. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, in partnership with the RNAO initiative at CHEO, a group of stakeholders, we conducted a gap analysis before implementing this best practice guideline in October 2020. And we did note multiple gaps in our patient and family care relating to human milk feeding practices. And so resources and education were gaps that were identified. And so priorities for action were strategically planned and selected. So resources were created, updates to our EPIC charting system occurred, initiation of a plan of a loaner pump started, and online resources and community networking for families post-discharge as well as in hospital were reviewed. Lastly, patient experience and graduated NICU parents were part of the updates that we made and reviewed any handouts. And this program also was connected to the family-centered care group at CHEO. Next slide, please. So benchmarking did occur to other Canadian pediatric hospitals already who had an established lactation consultant program. So Sick Kids was one of those, and we are grateful to them. Reviewing the literature was one of the steps in trying to understand the pediatric lactation consultant role and how this role uniquely can optimize one of the most socioeconomic and upstream health initiatives supporting human milk feeding for growth and nutrition with lifelong impacts for both the child and parents. Lactation consultants in the NICU have the potential, as kind of has been highlighted, to impact health for both parents as well as the cost of healthcare indirectly, with decreased rates of NEC, reduced risks of comorbidities associated with prematurity, and improved long-term health for the hospitalized infant in the NICU. And then there also is like supporting evidence too for like decreased hospital readmissions and overall human milk feeding increasing. So next slide.
Perfect. So who do we see? That's kind of the question that we had to identify when we are talking in this program. And we've come up with anybody who is willing to offer human milk as part of their feeding goals. They are able to put in a referral or a consult to our service. So we often see families, parents of lactating families. We see intended parents quite frequently for relactation and for the assistance in helping of providing EBM for them. We see many families who have an intended plan to have combination feeding, or those who maybe can't develop enough breast milk to go forward with a 100% express breast milk diet, but at least we can counsel them to have the most optimal supply possible. We often do many counsels on babies who are not oral feeding at the time. So we counsel on oral immune therapy and OIT. So we not only in the NICU, but as they go forward to the hospitalized child, we try to encourage OIT for those who are intubated and on breathing support, but also those who are just simply NG through their nose, or OG, which through their mouth, by tube feeding. We also see families who choose to maybe suppress their milk supply for either their choice or for medical necessity. Those who decide that they're at the end of their breastfeeding journey and they'd like to wean safely, because we also don't want anyone to continue down the road of having a big stormy cloud over their head and they might not have the best outcome at this time, where they need to safely do so, and we don't want to have mastitis and infection be the way that they end their breastfeeding or their human milk journey. Another one that we have had a very large focus on lately has been milk donation. So it's wonderful that we've gotten to see a little bit of the experience through the parent voice, and as well legacy donation, and we'll help cancel families through that as well. Another service that we have been providing in the recent months has been counseling families with lactation after loss and seeking them out for their follow-ups when they are at the Roger Nielsen House, which is a hospice that is associated with CHEO. And we make sure that they have everything that they need and the information required in order to safely end their human milk journey. The last final thing that the lactation support really does is we are a stakeholder in the NICU bereavement committee as well, so that if the family doesn't necessarily want to have an additional healthcare provider be present in their circle of care, we can at least get them the information that they need in order to continue with their journey. Next slide, please. So our care delivery. The way that we work is that all of our NICU admissions get an auto referral. So as part of the admission order set when a baby comes into our unit, that is automatically part of their orders, and we will be triggered to this right away. So basically our goal is to help parents with milk establishment, and we want to have that early establishment as early as possible so that we can get that care delivery to where we can offer oral immune therapy or OIT, and we can help counsel, especially our moms and our families with premature infants, the importance of early milk, as we have discussed already, as it helps with premature infants and the risk of their necrotizing enterocolitis. When we're outside of the NICU, anyone who is serviced by an RN, RPN, or a physician, we can have a consult put in from the initial emergency visit straight through to right when they're ready to go home. And we will continue to follow them through their visit as well. Our follow-ups. So the way that our team has been working is that our follow-ups are based on a triage system. So let's pretend that you have initiation of your milk supply, everything is going well, but you maybe don't need us every day. We'll triage you accordingly to the system that has been developed. And then we'll follow up when you're ready for maybe a transfer to breast. Maybe let's reestablish milk supply if we're noticing that we're having a dip. But at any point during that time, you can always have nursing staff or physicians reconsult us so that we can come back for questions, concerns, or maybe just a little tweak of information. The next thing that we do is we continue to support families from their admission straight through to discharge. So if we have an infant who was born prematurely, from the earliest stages, we will follow them through their journey until they are, in fact, ready to go home. We try to enforce that continuity of care, and we try to have our care evolve as their acuity changes. So initially, we might be consulting on oral immune therapy and colostrum, and just making sure that our families are supported in their feeding goals. And then we progress to milk supply, how we might bolster it and optimize it so that we have adequate supply to feed babies either by tube, bottle, etc. And then what we'll do is we'll counsel when we transition to breast and making sure that you have everything that you need before we actually transition to that home and discharge. Finally, what we do ensure is that when you are ready to go home, that you have all of the supports that you need and you have the information once you go home. So if you do need continued supports or care, that those are in place and you have adequate access to those resources before you do go. Next slide, please. So lastly is our exciting updates that we've had at CHEO. So as Alana mentioned, they worked very hard in the pilot program to get these loaner pumps established. And as part of Alana's fellowship, the loaner pump was developed over the course of her time as during her fellowship, and we were now able to implement it. So we do have loaner pump available to our families in the NICU. We do load it out on 4-day increments with the possibility of extension based on need and if other families are also within our unit. Our plan is to expand to hopefully have loaner pumps available for those who do need it, and we don't have to necessarily keep that time limit to those 4 days. But what we have found is that it eliminates that gap between when they're able to come from hospital. They might not be admitted to the hospital anymore and have access to a pump, but they might not have one at home yet because if baby came early, they weren't prepared at that time. We want to bridge that gap so that milk supply is established and we are able to offer that best care possible to that baby and provide them with colostrum when mommy is in that prime time to make it. What we've also done is we've advocated for a milk-free menu as well. So once our babies are admitted, it's a very, very stressful period, obviously, for families. And once they go to the floors or the inpatient units, or they're admitted from emergency to the inpatient units, the families are charged with a good portion of their care. So it can become a little bit of an anxiety, a high anxiety, high stress period for these families. And when we've told a parent that you need to go on an elimination diet because we are assuming that this baby might be cow's milk protein, either insensitive or allergy, we ask them to rid their diet of all cow's milk protein. When you're in the hospital and not everything is labeled out, it is quite tricky. So we have asked the dietary implement those changes, and we have heard from families that it has been extremely beneficial. It's just taken out the guesswork to having to order their food that they wouldn't have otherwise had. And we're trying to make things as simple and as streamlined as possible. We've implemented the Medela Cares program also with Medela, and what that does is it gives us access to additional pumps for our families who might need those extra supports in place. We've had this cooperation with our pharmacy, our outpatient pharmacy called KidCare, where based on the amount of movement that they have in their inventory, we will actually accrue some additional resources, either hand pumps or double electric pumps as needed for those families in need. just recently, we've been given the go-ahead to start with onboarding education as well. So we now are a part of our nursing corporate orientation, and our plan is to educate our new staff as they come into the hospital on the importance of breastfeeding, on the importance of early initiation of milk, and a pumping routine so that we can continue with those journeys and not have any interruption thus forth. So the reason being is between this and our ongoing breastfeeding workshops, which we will be starting as well, the plan is to help reduce the amount of readmissions to the hospital, either be dehydration, hyperbilirubinemia, or even failure to thrive down the road, because we want to make sure that these families are supported, and we want to make sure that they have a good foundation before they are discharged home. And lastly, now starting very shortly, we will be able to support our families in the outpatient clinics. So if a family has been admitted, we have seen them while they are admitted to the hospital, and they might need those additional supports, or just have questions and they don't need a full consult, they're able to call our team back to when they're in the hospital for those follow-ups, whether it be newborn follow-up clinic, whether it's the cardiology visits that they might have frequently. We've had a few with dialysis, so on and so forth. They're able to call back, and we can just have a quick chat with them to see if they are in need of any more information. And I think that's about all I have on that slide. Next slide, please, Leah. Thank you. So as part of our question period, the other thing that we wanted to ask was potentially if any families of the premature infants or even hospitalized children or anyone who has experienced a need for additional lactation support, if there's any gaps that you have found that you might think that might help us serve our families better.
Thank you. I was just about to type that out. I think it's such a great question. So anyone who received lactation support, if they can identify any gaps, is that right? In where they received. I love that. I think it goes right along with the amount of times you were talking about getting family voice. It seems like every step of the way you were saying, and with the family input and the family voice, like so important and yet sometimes overlooked. And so well done, you guys, for talking to families and taking their input when you're developing a program like this. I have a question about COVID. And when I read, okay, so you launched it as a pilot in 2020, and then it became permanent 2022. How did COVID impact this program? Because I can imagine you had additional challenges during that time trying to get something like this up and running.
Yeah, you are exactly right. I think every hospital was juggling, and nurses, we are like our resources and our skills were sometimes needed in different places. So we definitely juggled, and our leadership is phenomenal at CHEO. And it was a whole multidisciplinary team impact nursing profession. We have to have a huge shout out to as well. That's where we're housed now. Initially, we started in the NICU with a pilot, and then with the official launch, we're housed. Our managers are from nursing professional practice, that team. So we did. Jen and I are both NICU nurses, and so do have like vent training skills and stuff. And we had to do what families needed, and we do want an LC team, but there was gaps sometimes in care with the viral season and the acuity needs that we did sometimes not have an LC on. We're doing much better now, but that was because we would jump to support the most acute and the need based on what our directors and leaders were asking and following what family needs were. So we're, I think, in a much better place from what Jen can speak to than when we were in the pilot. But I have to say the fact that this happened during a pandemic is just a huge shout out to the leadership at CHEO that they tried something new in a pandemic. And we're working still on implementing best practice guidelines during a pandemic, and that we got to be part of that and have parent collaboration throughout the whole thing. Honestly, it was such a positive experience as a nurse. I'm so grateful to be part of this.
Yeah. And for us, when this past viral season was pretty tricky for CHEO as well. The Ottawa area had quite a significant uptick in all viral illnesses, and our program did take a little pause. However, we were able to still answer questions. Most people knew who the lactation consultants were in the hospital, and we would frequently receive lots of phone calls asking for support. So at least we were able to cover a little bit. We were able to sort of bridge that gap. If they did have major needs, then we were at least able to sort of have some coverage to go and see if we needed to. But it's been wonderful since, I'd say since January is when our program has really kicked off, and now we're running full steam, and operational needs have been quite steady. So at least we've been able to really focus on the program.
I see a question here from Josephine. Do you charge those you see or a built-in fee? They're struggling here, so she's joining us from Qatar here with additional cost with lactation consults. Sometimes a mother will benefit, but the moment they hear extra cost, they say no.
Oh, so for us in Ontario, our services are covered under OHIP, so there's no additional fee associated for us. We are a consulting service, just like occupational therapy, physiotherapy, or a medical service going forward. So that's not, unfortunately, something that we've had to experience. I'm sorry to hear that you do, because we've noticed that we've had quite a lot of demand for our service in recent months. So I can see how that would be across the board.
Is most of your work done in NICU? When you talk about demand for your service, does it tend to be more in NICU, or is it really kind of broadly and equally in demand?
Jen, do you want to go?
Oh, sure. I find we've been pretty equal in the demand. I mean, most of our NICU consults are based on pumping and milk expression. So we focus primarily on early initiation, pumping routines, and so forth. The majority of our families on the floor are NICU graduates, so we tend to follow them from their discharge or their graduation from the NICU onto the inpatient wards, and that's where we end up following. So even though it is 50-50, a good portion, I'd say probably close to 50 to 75% of our patients on the floor are NICU graduates anyway. So it's a tricky question to ask, but at the same time, majority are NICU families who have progressed, and then we have our inpatient wards after that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. If I can add just one quick thing too, like we do measure where they're coming from, because we can like look it up in Epic, and we keep track of our metrics. And the only other piece was sometimes we have families that go home, but they're coming back for like multiple cardiac surgeries and different things like that. And so it's a really continuity, like there's good continuity of care, because we see that family get them pumping again while baby's intubated and not directly feeding, and then seeing them relatch post-op and all that stuff. It's quite it's such an honor to be part of those moments, and to see the babies growing versus when we're just working as nurses in the NICU, we don't often get to see them like coming back and forth. So that's kind of a perk, I think, of being an LC at a pediatric hospital.
I'll close our time with this final question. What advice would you give to those hospitals who are looking to start a program like yours?
I would say, first of all, do it. Because honestly, it has been so, it's been eye-opening from our perspective to see the demand and the need. But also, we've also seen the benefit from the medical side of things, the nursing side of things, where it alleviates a lot of pressure off of the frontline staff. And the emails that we do get back from families, or the feedback that we do get from families, has been nothing but positive. So even if you can start with one lactation consultant, or even just have breastfeeding champions, I think would be really beneficial to those hospitals that are thinking of starting something. But I think anything is better than not having any supports in place. So.
And to reach out to CHEO or reach out to
Yeah.
any hospital that has an established lactation program, because benchmarking really helped us build evidence. And there's a lot of evidence for the lactation consultant role in the NICU when you just Google on PubMed. So, but lactation consultants were very passionate, and I think we'd like, just contact us. We'd be happy to collaborate or share what worked well, what didn't work well, and how we made progress.
Mm-hmm.
And having a family patient experience team too, I think that just gives extra voice and collaboration.
We do have a question that kind of falls right into that when you were talking about reaching out to you. This is someone just looking for links or documents that can be presented to advocate for workshops to better promote breastfeeding. And so when you say reach out to you, can people find you both on the CHEO website, or what's the best way to connect with you about something like this?
On our slides, are they going to all be posted? Our contact information is there with the references at the end.
Very good. Okay, yes. So this will be posted on the CPBF website. And so at any time, people can go back and get your information. So that is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll be able to connect with you. And then one other person was just curious about how many births you have per year at CHEO. I don't know if you know that, or...
We don't have any. CHEO doesn't actually have a labor and delivery or a birthing unit. We are within the city. There are 4 other hospitals that do, but ours is one that consults in. So we tend to get the calls, and our transport team will go and pick up babies in need. Or the closest hospital to us is the Ottawa General, and they have also a level 3A NICU, but those who are cardiac or genetic, or they have NEC, require surgical services, they come over to us. So they'll transport babies to us as well, but we don't actually have any births.
And so the follow-up program is how many preterm infants? So would you, yeah.
I don't have that number. I really wish that I did. Alana, do you?
I'm just trying to count the beds in the pods to say how many beds we have. I think that we could definitely get this information for you. I don't currently have it. I'm sorry.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing about your program and for encouraging others, because even to hear about it and its successes, and even the whole thing of going from a pilot project to a permanent program, I feel like you give people hope by even presenting the success that you've had. So thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And we're going to bookend our program today speaking with another mom, which I just love that we've done this, because as we all know, family voice is so important. And so we're going to be joined by Dana McClellan. She is mom to 4 children, and it was her last baby, Timothy, who was her NICU baby. He was born at 28 weeks due to preterm membrane rupture and placental abruption. Dana started pumping, but their journey was not straightforward, and they ended up spending over 100 days in NICU together. Dana is going to share her journey with us and how she and Timothy are still enjoying their breastfeeding journey 11 months after NICU. Hello, Timothy. Welcome, Dana and Timothy. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi.
Hello.
So this is going to be super informal because he's here. I wasn't expecting him to be with me, but he is. So yeah, we started our breastfeeding journey by breast 14 or 15 weeks after he was born. But I started pumping like immediately. So he got some colostrum from me, and he got some donor milk from amazing moms who donate in NICU at KGH, about 2 hours away from our home. So we spent oh my goodness, tons of hours on the road. And you would often, if you were driving down the 401 and I was there, you'd see me with my pump and passengering myself to and from Kingston, pumping. And I'm sure all the truckers had a good chuckle about that. So he ended up with NEC, very, very mild, thankfully, and mostly self-resolving. I expect largely because he was receiving breast milk exclusively, which is truly a labor of love. Pumping is not a walk in the park. It is probably my least favorite thing I've ever had to do. And I certainly never expected to have to pump for 13 or 14 weeks. It was just not something that I really enjoyed. However, it became something that I enjoyed because it was the only thing I could do for my baby. And so often you can see me here with my little get up on. I have 4 children, and going back and forth between Kingston and our home in 2 hours away from Kingston, it was you had to multitask a lot. So I'm standing there in my kitchen getting all my kitchen things done while I was home before I had to go back. I was very fortunate to also have an oversupply, which is a stark contrast from my first baby when I couldn't produce at all. And so I ended up being told also, stop bringing it in. We don't have any more room. Only bring in his OIT every day, and we will let you know when we need more for the freezer here. Yeah, it was not in the cards for us to have a normal term pregnancy for our 4th baby. And he did struggle a lot with feeding. It was definitely probably his biggest hurdle. And the most frustrating for me, I think, because you just want to be able to nurse your baby and go home. So he struggled with meningitis and sepsis, and he had a brain bleed and all of these different things that just made it so difficult. And the longer that he had this feeding tube in, the more difficult it became for him to start a normal oral feed. So between OG and NG, he was feeding tube for the full 13 or 14 weeks. It wasn't until 2 days, I think, before we were discharged that he started feeding on his own by breast. And it was very helpful to have the lactation consultants from Sick Kids be a part of our journey, because they really just know their stuff and they're so supportive and helpful. And it was very beneficial for myself and Timothy to have resources available to us. And like that woman from Qatar was saying, they have to pay for those things, and we're so fortunate that those things are just a luxury here. We're not paying for those. Even in the community, you don't pay for those services. So I think we're very fortunate to have that kind of support for breastfeeding moms. That obviously isn't something guaranteed all over the world. And like others have said before, it's medicine for your baby. You are providing your child with really, in a lot of situations, the only thing that you can do for them is give them your milk, and you're healing them with it. It's a very miraculous sort of experience, knowing that all your efforts are very helpful for your baby. And so I didn't really, this is just a photo of me kind of commemorating all of the hard work that Timothy, and I put into nursing. And there is half of the milk that I was able to donate to one of two families in need. More hard work. Yeah, and I think that's pretty much all I really have to say. It was just a very tough thing to go through, but we're very fortunate that even though he had all of those things wrong and the brain bleed and everything is resolved, and we're still continuing our breastfeeding journey over a year later with Timothy, a year and 2 days actually. So those are very special things that I don't take for granted. I know that it's very unusual for a mom to be able to breastfeed her baby coming from the NICU world, and it's truly a labor of love, and I'm very grateful to have had support from all of the nurses and LCs and doctors at KGH and then PRHC as well. We've been very fortunate.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey and the pictures. I love them. They just show to me just the real journey of pumping and how it becomes a part of everyday life. I wanted to ask you,
Yes.
Timothy is your fourth, and so how did your experiences with your other kids impact your breastfeeding journey with Timothy?
You know, my children are very, very adaptable, and I'm very grateful. I've been a stay-at-home mom for 9 years, so that was a big adjustment for them because I was gone for pretty much 2 months straight in Kingston, but they are very understanding, and my husband is phenomenal. So he really picked up all what I would have done at home and sort of filled the gap as best that he could. But they were so interested in like watching me pump and figuring out why I had to do it and how it worked. And they used to, "Mommy, that one's nearly full. Let me grab you another bottle." And so they would help me switch from one bottle to the next with the pump. And it was, I think, something that they won't forget. And I have 2 girls that are 9 and 6. And so I really hope that they take that kind of dedication and use it in their futures if they have their own babies someday, and see how important, remember how important it is.
Dedication
for babies.
Yeah, dedication.
And for my son as well.
Yeah. I'm wondering how you could have focused on producing breast milk when there were so many complications with Timothy, like you mentioned, the meningitis and the sepsis.
Well, I think everyone always says, you know, you have to focus on eating and you have to focus on drinking, and those are very, very important factors in producing enough milk for your baby. But also, it's just something you need to, I think, decide to just, if you want to do it, it's part of just the determination to, once you know that you are able to produce milk, just really focus on what you can do for your child when there's really not much else you can do. So that was, in my mind, the driving factor was I couldn't hold him most of the time. I think in the 8 weeks when we were spending in Kingston, I held him less than a handful of times. He was very sick until he was well enough to be transferred to our regional center. So really, realistically, the only thing I could do was pump my milk. Otherwise, there was nothing I could do for him. So that was sort of a really significant driving force for me.
Yeah. Well, do you have any advice for moms who are struggling with pumping or with their breastfeeding journey with their NICU babies?
I think it's just everything in the NICU seems so monumental when it's happening. And it is. But a year and a half, or not a year and a half, but a year later, it all kind of feels like a fever dream. It's so relevant and so fresh, but also so distant at the same time. And I just feel like you need to be kind to yourself in those moments, because the end goal is always just a healthy baby. And if you can't do it, your baby will still be okay. But if you can, it's a really great gift that you can give to yourself and your baby. But just, I guess, to be kind to yourself, because it's such a tough journey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I think that is great advice to end on. So important to be kind to ourselves, because you're right, it is tough. And so thank you for sharing your journey and for sharing Timothy with us now. It's such a joy to see them after NICU and how well they're doing. So thank you, Dana.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us today for this special episode of Preemie Chats. I just want to give a special thank you to our sponsors for today's program, AstraZeneca and Medela, in collaboration with FICARE, the Canadian Association of Neonatal Nurses, EFCNI, and Glance. Just a reminder that if you missed part of today's session, head on over to canadianpreemies.org, where you can watch the program in its entirety. And you'll find all of the past editions of Preemie Chats there. There are many resources and support options available, and you'll be reminded that CPBF is a charitable organization, and it depends on support to continue its important work. Consider how you can support CPBF in its mission to empower families of premature babies in every step of their journey. Together, we can create a brighter future for all preemies and their families. Join us here next Friday, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, as we look at insights into retinopathy of prematurity, or ROP, the risk factors, the development, the consequences, and emerging management strategies. So if you're available next Friday, join us then. And I hope you all have a good weekend. And for those Canadians who have a long weekend, have a great long weekend. Thank you, everyone.